Every soul in Natchez knew Judge William Harlan's justice was as final as a coffin nail, but they didn't know his daughter was the one stealing the bodies from the graves he dug. The humidity pressed against Elalena Harlan's skin like a living thing as she stood at her bedroom window, watching the men shuffle across the courthouse yard in chains. August in Natchez, Mississippi had a way of making everything feel inevitable. The heat, the sweat, the sentencing that would come at noon when her father took his seat behind the bench. She counted them. Always counted them. 7 this morning, 3 would hang, 4 would be sold deeper south. 2 places where even memory went to die. Her fingernails dug into the windowsill, leaving tiny crescents in the painted wood. The same wood her mother had touched before the fever took her. The same wood that had watched Eleanor grow from a girl who believed in her father's justice to a woman who knew better. Judge William Harlan was a monument of a man, 6'4" of unassailable certainty, with a voice that could shake the walls of the courthouse and a reputation that reached all the way to Jackson. When he spoke the word guilty, it fell like a stone into still water, final, irreversible, drowning any hope that dared to surface. Elalena had loved him once, loved the way he tucked her into bed with stories of Solomon's wisdom, loved the pride in his eyes when she recited scripture perfectly at Sunday service, loved the safety of being William Harlan's daughter in a town that respected nothing more than power and bloodline. That love had curdled somewhere between her 16th birthday and her somewhere between watching her first hanging and realizing that the men who died wore the same expression as the horses her father shot when they broke their legs. A terrible, silent resignation. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 9. 3 hours until sentencing. 3 hours until her father would seal fates with the same casual authority he used to order his breakfast. Elalena moved away from the window and crossed to her vanity. The mirror reflected a woman the town called beautiful in the cautious way men describe something they want but fear to touch. Dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. Green eyes that her father said came from her Irish grandmother. Skin kept pale by a lifetime of parasols and long sleeves. Untouched by the Mississippi sun that turned everyone else the color of old leather. She picked up the pearl necklace her father had given her last Christmas. Expensive, tasteful, a collar dressed as a gift. She set it back down without putting it on. Instead, she opened the bottom drawer of her vanity, the one that stuck unless you knew to lift while you pulled. Beneath her winter gloves and a box of old letters, her fingers found the leather journal. No lock, no ribbon, nothing to suggest it contained anything more interesting than recipes or garden observations. Elalena opened it to the last entry. The ink was still fresh enough to smear if she touched it. August 14, 1846. Solomon, carpenter from the Whitfield plantation, accused of stealing tools to build himself a coffin. His master's words, not mine. 28 years old. Scar above his left eye from childhood. Reads better than half the men in this town. Father sentenced him to 50 lashes and sailed to New Orleans. I gave him 3 days head start in the map to the Jeffries farm. Below that, 39 other entries, 39 names, 39 men who should have been dead or disappeared into the cotton fields of the Deep South, but who had instead walked out of Natchez and into legend. 39 secrets that could get her killed. The first one had been an accident, or perhaps not an accident, but an impulse she hadn't fully understood until it was already done. His name was Jacob, 22 years old, caught trying to reach his wife after she'd been sold to a plantation in Vicksburg. Judge Harlan sentenced him to hang at dawn. Elalena had watched the sentencing from the gallery, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed in the expression of pleasant neutrality that well-bred women wore like armor. But inside, something was screaming. That night she couldn't sleep, couldn't stop seeing Jacob's face when the sentence was read, couldn't stop thinking about the wife he'd never reach. She'd risen from bed in her nightgown and walked downstairs, past her father's study where she could hear him snoring, past the kitchen where the house slaves slept. That's out the back door and across the lawn to the carriage house where the town kept prisoners overnight before execution. The guard was a man named Petrie, 40 years old, drank too much, owed money to half the merchants in town. Elalena knew this because her father complained about it regularly, knew that Petrie's weakness was the same as most men's. He wanted what he couldn't afford. She'd brought her mother's ruby ring, the one she was supposed to save for her wedding day. Petrie had stared at her like she was a ghost when she appeared in the doorway, stared harder when she held out the ring. I want to speak with the prisoner, she'd said, privately, for 1 hour. Miss Harlan, I can't. My father doesn't need to know. No one needs to know. 1 hour, Mr. Petrie. And you'll never have to worry about your debts to Mr. Patterson's general store again. She'd watched him calculate, watched greed war with fear. Greed won. It usually did. Jacob had been chained to the wall when Petrie led her into the cell. His head was bowed, his breathing shallow. He didn't look up until the door closed behind her. Who are you? His voice was dust, someone who's going to help you run. His head snapped up. In the lamplight, she could see the bruises on his face from where they'd beaten him during the arrest. We could see the hope kindle in his eyes like a match struck in darkness. Why? It was a fair question. She didn't have a good answer then, still wasn't sure she had one now. 40 men later, because what they're doing to you is wrong, she'd said, and I'm the only one in a position to do something about it. She'd brought a file hidden in her skirts, brought a map she'd drawn herself, showing the safe houses and river crossings, brought bread and dried meat wrapped in cloth, and she'd brought something else, something she hadn't planned, something that happened in the space between his chains falling away and his hand touching hers in gratitude. She'd kissed him not because she loved him, not even because she desired him particularly, but because in that moment, Jacob was the most free thing she'd ever touched. Because his survival was an act of rebellion, and every breath he took after dawn would be a theft from her father's justice. She wanted to taste that theft on her lips. He'd fled into the swamps that night. By morning, the cell was empty. Petrie was rich enough to pay his debts, and Judge Harland was apoplectic with rage. Eloanina had sat at the breakfast table, eating her eggs with perfect composure, while her father raged about incompetence and negligence and the degradation of law and order. "Don't worry, father," she'd said sweetly. "I'm sure they'll catch him. They never did. That should have been the end of it. One moment of madness. One sin to carry to her grave. But 3 weeks later there was another sentencing. Another man whose only crime was wanting to be human in a world that had decided he wasn't, and Ilania found herself walking to the carriage house again, found herself with another bribe, another map, another kiss in the darkness before dawn. It became a pattern, a ritual, an addiction she couldn't name. The town began to notice. How could they not? Prisoners didn't just escape from Natchez. Judge Harland ran too tight a ship, kept too close a watch, but they did escape. Every single man Eloanina visited vanished within 48 hours. No hounds could track them. No searches turned them up. It was as if they stepped through a door into another world and pulled it shut behind them. The whispers started small, grew louder. By the time Eloanina had freed her 20th man, the rumors had taken on a life of their own. Some said she was a witch, that she opened doorways to hell and traded the prisoners' souls for her own damnation. Some said she was mad, that grief over her mother's death had broken something in her mind. Some said she was defiled, that she laid with the condemned men in their cells, that she was addicted to the forbidden, that she was everything a proper Southern woman should never be. All of it was true. None of it was true. Eloanina didn't bother to correct them, let them think what they wanted, let them clutch their pearls and whisper behind their fans. Every minute they spent scandalized was a minute. They weren't looking for the men she'd freed, but her father was looking. He was looking. Judge William Harland hadn't built his reputation by being blind. He saw the pattern, saw how the escapes always happened after Eloanina had visited the courthouse, saw how she'd started wearing her mother's jewelry less and less, as if she'd been trading it away piece by piece. He'd confronted her once, stood in her doorway at midnight, still in his judicial robes, his face carved from stone. "Ella, I need you to tell me the truth." She'd looked up from her book, met his eyes without flinching. "About what, father?" "About these escapes, about your visits to the prisoners. I visit them to pray for their souls. Someone should, don't you think? Since you're sending them to meet their maker." His jaw had tightened. "Don't blaspheme in this house. I thought truth was sacred in this house. Isn't that what you always taught me?" They'd stared at each other across a gulf that had once been love and had become something else entirely, something that tasted like betrayal on both sides. He'd left without another word. That was 3 months ago. Since then, the silence between them had grown thick enough to drown in. Eloanina closed her journal and returned it to its hiding place from downstairs. She heard the breakfast bell. Her father would be waiting. She smoothed her dress, checked her reflection one last time, and descended the stairs with the practiced grace of a woman who knew she was being watched, always watched, by servants, by neighbors, by her father's cold, calculating eyes. Judge Harland sat at the head of the table, the morning newspaper spread before him. He didn't look up when she entered. "Good morning, father." Eloanina, not good morning, just her name, flat, distant. She took her seat. The servant, a woman named Bess who'd been with the family since before Eloanina was born, brought coffee and grits. Eloanina thanked her. Her father didn't acknowledge Bess's existence. That was something else that had changed in the way she'd started seeing the people her father looked through, to started learning their names, their stories, their humanity. It made what she did easier, made it feel less like rebellion and more like correction, like setting right what her father kept breaking. 7 men today, Judge Harland said, still not looking at her. 3 will hang, the others will be sold. I'm sure you'll be very fair, father. Now, he looked up. His eyes were the color of winter ice. Fair. Yes, I'm always fair, Ilolani. That's what justice is. Fairness, order, consequence, and mercy. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. Something dangerous flickered across his face. Mercy is for God to dispense. I dispense the law. Perhaps God needs better representatives. The slap came so fast she didn't see it, didn't feel it until her cheek was burning and her ears were ringing and her father was standing over her, breathing hard. You will not speak to me that way. You will not shame this family with your proclivities. You will remember who you are and what you owe to the name Harland. Eloanina touched her cheek, tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. She stood slowly, met his eyes again. This time, she smiled. "I remember exactly who I am, Father. The question is, do you?" She walked out of the dining room without being dismissed. Behind her, she heard china shatter against the wall. The courthouse in Natchez was a temple to certainty. 3 stories of white-columned authority that looked down on Front Street like a disappointed father surveying disappointing children. Ella Lenina had spent her entire life in its shadow, first as a girl sitting in the gallery during her father's trials, watching justice performed like theater, and later as a woman who understood that theater was all it had ever been. She entered through the side door, the one reserved for the judge's family. The morning heat had already turned the interior into an oven. Despite the high ceilings and the windows thrown open to catch whatever breeze dared to venture this far inland from the river, the sentencing would begin at noon. But the courtroom was already filling. Planters in their fine coats, merchants hoping to buy the convicted at auction, curious townsfolk with nothing better to do than watch other people's lives end. The gallery smelled of tobacco and sweat and something else Eleanor had learned to recognize, the particular scent of people who'd come to witness suffering and call it righteousness. She found her usual seat in the front row, where the judge's daughter was expected to sit, a performance of family solidarity, a reminder that Judge Harlan's bloodline stood behind his verdicts. Except Ella Lenina's presence here wasn't solidarity anymore. It was reconnaissance. She needed to see them. You needed to choose which one she'd save, because she couldn't save them all. That was the mathematics of mercy. In a world built on cruelty, you saved who you could and carried the weight of everyone else for the rest of your life. The 7 men were led in at 11:45, chains connecting their wrists and ankles, the metal scraping against the wooden floor like a death rattle. Ella Lenina studied each face, committing them to memory. The first was old, 60 at least, maybe older. His back was bent from decades in the fields, his eyes clouded with cataracts. Whatever he'd done to end up here, he wouldn't survive a week of hard labor in the Deep South. A hanging might be the more merciful sentence. The second and third were young brothers, from the look of them. Same broad nose, same high cheekbones. Too young to die, too young to disappear into the cotton fields. But there were 2 of them, and Ella Lenina could only save one. The fourth was a woman that stopped Ella Lenina cold. Her father rarely tried women. Usually, they were dealt with by their masters privately, in ways that never made it to court. For a woman to stand trial meant she'd done something that couldn't be ignored. The fifth was missing an arm, lost it to a cotton gin, Ella Lenina guessed. He looked at the crowd with the expression of a man who'd already died, and was just waiting for his body to catch up. The 6th was enormous, 6.5 feet tall, muscles that suggested a lifetime of blacksmith work or dock labor. His face was a map of scars, old and new. He looked at Judge Harlan's empty bench with something Ella Lenina recognized. Calculation. He was planning something. Probably wouldn't live long enough to execute it. The 7th made her breath catch. He couldn't have been more than 18. Still had the softness of youth in his face, though his eyes were already ancient with the particular aging that came from surviving in a world designed to kill you. His hands were inks, a house slave then, educated enough to write, dangerous enough to think. He looked up at the gallery, scanning the crowd with the desperate hope of someone looking for a friendly face. His eyes found Ella Lenina's, held them. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, maybe, or prophecy. Ella Lenina had learned to trust these moments. The sudden certainty that this was the one. This was who she'd save. His name, she'd learn later, was Nathaniel. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge William Harlan entered in his black robes, moving with the deliberate gravity of a man who'd long ago confused his position with his worth. He settled into his chair, arranged his papers, and looked out over the courtroom with the satisfaction of a landowner surveying his property. His eyes passed over Ella Lenina without stopping. She might as well have been furniture. "We'll begin with the woman," he announced. She was brought forward. Her name was Ruth, 26 years old, accused of poisoning her master's wife. The evidence was circumstantial at best. A convenient death. A slave who'd been heard complaining about her treatment. An autopsy that showed nothing conclusive but allowed for speculation. Ella Lenina had seen this dance before. Guilt didn't matter. Conviction was about maintenance, reminding everyone that the order of things was fixed, immutable, enforced by the full weight of law. Her father pronounced Ruth guilty, sentenced her to hang within the week. Ruth didn't scream, didn't plead, just nodded once, as if confirming something she'd always known, and let herself be led away. Ella Lenina's hands tightened on her Bible, not because she was praying, but because the leather cover gave her something to grip instead of her father's throat. The brothers were next, accused of planning an escape, caught with maps and provisions. There was no question of guilt. They'd been found with the evidence. The only question was the sentence. Judge Harlan sold them. Separate sales, 2 plantations 300 miles apart. A punishment more creative than hanging. They'd spend the rest of their lives knowing the other was alive somewhere, unreachable, beyond saving. When they were led away, the younger one was crying. The older one just stared straight ahead, his jaw set, refusing to give the court the satisfaction of his pain. 4 more to go. The old man, the one-armed man, the scarred giant, and Nathaniel, the old man, was next. accused of teaching younger slaves to read, a capital offense in Mississippi. Though Judge Harlan seemed inclined toward mercy, he sentenced the man to 50 lashes instead of hanging. Mercy, as if destroying a man's back was somehow kind. The one-armed man had stolen food, 3 chickens from his master's hen, normally a whipping offense, but he'd run when they'd come to arrest him. Running made everything worse. Judge Harlan sold him to a sugar plantation in Louisiana, a death sentence delivered with paperwork instead of rope. The scarred giant was accused of assaulting an overseer. He'd broken the man's jaw and 3 ribs before they'd subdued him with dogs and clubs. There was no question what the sentence would be. "You'll hang at dawn," Judge Harlan said. No emotion, just fact, like commenting on the weather. The giant smiled, actually smiled. "Good," he said. "I was getting bored anyway." It was the wrong thing to say. Judge Harlan's face darkened. "Add 20 lashes before the execution. Maybe that will teach you proper respect." The giant's smile widened. "You can't teach a dead man nothing." He was dragged from the courtroom, still smiling, still defiant, already a ghost. That left Nathaniel Elalanin leaned forward slightly as he was brought before the bench. Up close, she could see the ink stains more clearly, could see how his fingers trembled slightly, though his face remained composed. "Nathaniel," Judge Harlan said, reading from his notes, "house slave belonging to Dr. Marcus Webb, accused of forging freedom papers. How do you plead?" "Guilty, sir." The honesty surprised the courtroom. A murmur ran through the gallery. Slaves were supposed to deny everything, plead ignorance, blame others. Confession was tactical suicide. Judge Harlan raised an eyebrow. "You admit to this crime?" "Yes, sir. I forged myself and 3 others. We were going to leave tomorrow night." "Where did you learn to write well enough to forge documents?" "Dr. Webb taught me. Said I had an aptitude. Let me read his medical books." Nathaniel paused. "I'm grateful to him for that. Grateful enough not to betray his kindness by running away. Kindness would have been freeing me, sir. Teaching me to read while keeping me in chains isn't kindness. It's cruelty with better vocabulary." The courtroom went silent. No one spoke to Judge Harlan that way. Certainly not a slave on trial for his life. Elelena found herself holding her breath. Her father's face had gone completely blank. That was more dangerous than anger. Anger was predictable. This was calculation. "I see Dr. Webb's education has given you a sharp tongue." "Yes, sir. Along with the ability to recognize injustice when it's dressed up as law." "You realize I could hang you for this, for the forgery alone. Never mind your insolence." "Yes, sir. I realize that. I also realize that you'll probably do it whether I'm insolent or not. So I figured I might as well speak the truth while I still have breath to speak it." Judge Harlan steepled his fingers, studied Nathaniel like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. "How old are you, boy?" 18, sir. 18 years old and already this bitter, this broken." "Not broken, sir. Just clear-eyed." Elelona could see her father wrestling with something, could see the moment he made his decision. "I'm going to give you a choice, Nathaniel. Something I rarely do. You can hang quick and clean, or you can be sold to the Blackwood plantation in Alabama. Nathan Blackwood runs a cotton operation, works his slaves. Hard, very hard. I'm told the average lifespan for a field hand there is about 5 years. He leaned forward. "So what will it be? A fast death, or a slow one?" Nathaniel didn't hesitate. "The plantation, sir." "Why?" "You know you'll suffer there. You'll be worked to death in those fields." "Because suffering means I'm still alive. And while I'm alive, there's hope." Something shifted in Judge Harlan's expression. Not sympathy, but perhaps a recognition of a worthy opponent. Or maybe just irritation that this slave wouldn't give him the satisfaction of breaking. "So be it. You'll be transported to Alabama next week. In the meantime, you'll wait in the courthouse cells. I wouldn't want you getting any ideas about escaping." He banged his gavel. "This court is adjourned." The guards moved to take Nathaniel away. As they did, he looked up at the gallery one more time, found Elelanina's eyes again. This time she let herself smile. Just a slight curve of her lips, just enough to say, "Wait for me." He saw it. She could tell by the way his shoulders straightened slightly. By the way, something like hope flickered across his face before he schooled it back to neutrality. Then he was gone, led away to the cells beneath the courthouse, where condemned men waited for their sentences to be carried out. Elelanina remained seated while the courtroom emptied. Her father left through his private exit without acknowledging her. The spectators filed out, already gossiping about the day's proceedings. Within an hour, the whole town would know about the slave who talked back to Judge Harlan and lived. For now, when the courtroom was empty except for her and one elderly bailiff who was snoring in the corner, Elelena finally stood. Her legs were stiff from sitting. Her head ached from the heat and the tension and the weight of what she'd just witnessed. 7 people sentenced. 7 lives altered or ended by a father's voice. 7 souls weighed and measured and found wanting by a system that had decided their worth before they were even born. She could save one. Nathaniel, but that meant abandoning the others. Ruth would hang. The brothers would be torn apart. The old man would be beaten. The one-armed man would die slowly in the Louisiana heat. The scarred giant would smile his way to the gallows. The mathematics of mercy. The accounting of the damned. Ila walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. The heat hit her like a physical force, pressing against her skin, making the air thick and hard to breathe. She had 4 days before Nathaniel was transported to Alabama. 4 days to plan, 4 days to bribe the right people, draw the right maps, arrange the right escape route, 4 days to commit another sin her father would never forgive. She turned toward home, already calculating, already planning, already damning herself a little more. The Harland estate sat on a hill overlooking the Mississippi River, 3 acres of manicured gardens and white columns that announced to everyone who passed that Judge William Harland was a man of consequence. Ella had loved this house once, the way children love anything familiar. Now it felt like a museum dedicated to a civilization she no longer believed in. She entered through the servant's door, a calculated choice. Her father would be in his study until dinner, reviewing case files and correspondence. The house slaves would be preparing the evening meal. She had perhaps 2 hours before anyone would miss her, 2 hours to do what needed to be done. Her room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the gardens. Ella locked the door behind her and moved immediately to her wardrobe. Behind her winter coats and Sunday dresses, she'd created a false back, a panel that lifted away to reveal a hollow space. About 2 feet deep. Inside that space lived her rebellion. Maps of Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee, marked with safe houses and river crossings. Letters from Underground Railroad conductors, written in code but clear enough once you knew what to look for. Money, nearly $300 saved from her allowance and the discreet sale of her mother's jewelry. And weapons. 2 pistols her father didn't know were missing from his collection. A knife small enough to hide in a boot. Ella pulled out the newest map, the one she'd been perfecting for weeks. It showed a route from Natchez to Memphis, avoiding major roads and known patrol areas. 70 miles through swamp and forest and small towns where strangers were noticed and reported. She'd sent 39 men along this route, 39 successes, 39 reasons to believe it would work again. But Nathaniel was different. Nathaniel could read, could write, could forge documents. He wasn't just another escaped slave. He was educated, articulate, dangerous in all the ways that made white Southerners nervous. They'd hunt him harder than the others. Her father would make it personal. She needed to be smarter, this time faster, more careful. A knock on her door made her freeze. Miss Ella. Bess's voice, cautious and familiar. Ella quickly replaced the panel and closed the wardrobe. Yes, Bess, your father wants to see you in his study. That says it's important. Of course it was important. Everything with her father was important. Every conversation, a chess game. Every word weighed and measured for advantage. Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes, he said. Now, Miss Ella. She closed her eyes, breathed, composed her face into the mask of beautiful daughter that she'd worn for so many years it almost felt natural on coming. Her father's study was exactly what you'd expect from a man who believed order was next to godliness. Books arranged by subject and height, papers stacked in perfect right angles, a portrait of Andrew Jackson above the fireplace, looking stern and satisfied, as if he approved of everything William Harland had built. The judge sat behind his massive oak desk, a crystal glass of bourbon in his hand despite the early hour. He didn't look up when Ella entered. Sit down. Ella. She sat, folded her hands in her lap, waited. He took a long sip of bourbon, set the glass down carefully, finally looked at her. I'm sending you to Charleston. The words hit like a slap. What? You'll leave next week? Your Aunt Catherine has agreed to host you for the winter social season. There are several eligible young men. They're lawyers, doctors, men of good family. It's time you married. Ella mind raced. Charleston was 600 miles away. 600 miles from Nathaniel, from everything she'd built. I don't want to go to Charleston. What you want is immaterial. You're 24 years old, Ella. You've rejected every suitable match in Mississippi. People are beginning to talk. Let them talk. I will not. His voice hardened. Your behavior this past year has been increasingly erratic. These visits to the courthouse, your rudeness at breakfast, the way you look at me like I'm something to be scraped off your shoe. He leaned forward. I know what you're doing, Ella. I don't have proof yet, but I know. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I don't know what you mean. Don't insult my intelligence. 43 prisoners have escaped from Natchez in the past year, 43 from a town that hadn't had a single escape in the previous decade, and every single one of them disappeared shortly after you visited the courthouse. Correlation isn't causation, father. You taught me that. No, but it's suspicious as hell. He stood, walked to the window overlooking his gardens. I've given you every advantage, Ella. Education, position, a name that means something in this state. And you've repaid me with rebellion and disgrace. You've given me a cage made of advantages. He turned, and for a moment she saw something that might have been pain cross his face. I've given you safety. Do you have any idea what would happen to you if the truth came out? If people knew you'd been helping slaves escape, they'd call you a traitor, an abolitionist. They'd destroy you, Ella. Destroy this family. Maybe this family deserves to be destroyed. The slap came harder this time. Her head snapped to the side, her vision blurring. When she looked back at him, there was blood on her lip. You will go to Charleston, he said quietly. You will comport yourself as a Harland. You will find a husband. And you will stop this madness before it kills you. Elalina stood, her legs shaking but her voice steady. And if I refuse, then I'll have you committed. Dr. Whitmore has already agreed to sign the papers. He's quite convinced that your behavior indicates hysteria. Perhaps a few months in an asylum will restore your proper thinking. It wasn't an idle threat. Elalina knew her father well enough to recognize certainty when she heard it. He would do it. Would lock her away and call it medicine, unless she gave him a reason not to. She touched her bleeding lip, considering her options. All of them were bad. Some were just less bad than others. Give me until the end of the month, she said. Let me tie up my affairs here. Say goodbye properly. Then I'll go to Charleston without complaint. He studied her suspiciously. Why the delay? Because I'm not a piece of furniture you can just ship away. I have obligations. Friends, I need time to prepare. You have 1 week, not a day more, and in the meantime, you will not leave this house without my permission. You will not visit the courthouse. You will not communicate with anyone of questionable character. Am I understood? Perfectly good. He returned to his desk, picked up his bourbon. You're dismissed. Elalina left the study with measured steps. Didn't allow herself to shake until she was back in her room with the door locked and her back against the wall. 1 week. She had 1 week to save Nathaniel and escape from her father's house before she was either married off or locked in an asylum. The mathematics had changed. Now she wasn't just saving Nathaniel's life, she was saving her own. That night, Elalina waited until the house was dark and silent before she moved. 2 in the morning, the hour when even the watchful slept. She dressed in her plainest clothes, dark colors, practical boots, her hair pinned up and hidden under a bonnet. In the dark, at a distance, she could pass for a servant, or at least someone not worth noticing. The pistol went into the pocket of her cloak, the knife into her boot, the map and money into a leather satchel. She was traveling light, because she'd need to move fast. Getting out of the house without being seen required knowledge she'd accumulated over 24 years. She knew which stairs creaked, knew which doors were oiled and which weren't, knew that the guard her father had posted would be sleeping off his nightly bourbon by now. She made it to the stables without incident. Her horse, a bay mare named Judith, greeted her with a soft nicker. Elalina saddled her quickly, muscle memory guiding her hands in the darkness. The ride to town took 40 minutes. The streets of Natchez were empty except for a few drunks stumbling home from the taverns. Elalina kept to the shadows, kept Judith to a walk. Nothing to attract attention. The courthouse loomed against the night sky, its white columns ghostly in the moonlight. The prisoners were kept in cells beneath the building, accessible through a locked door at the back. The guard there was a man named Toby, younger than Petrie, less experienced, but also less corrupt, which meant she couldn't buy him with money alone. She needed a different currency. Elalina knocked on the door, light, tentative, like a frightened woman seeking help. Toby opened it, blinking sleep from his eyes. Miss, what are you? She pushed past him into the guardroom. Please, I need your help. Someone's following me. Following you. Who? I don't know. A man. I was walking home from my cousin's house and he started pursuing me. I tried to lose him, but he kept coming. This was the only place I could think of that would be safe. It was a terrible story, full of holes. No woman in her right mind would be walking alone at 2 in the morning. But Toby was young, and Elalina had learned that young men rarely questioned pretty women in distress. I suppose that would be all right. But just for a few minutes. I can't leave my post, of course. Thank you. You're very kind. She sat on the bench near the stove, arranging her skirts, letting herself look vulnerable, letting Toby see exactly what he expected to see, a frightened lady in need of protection. While he watched the door, Elalina watched the room. The keys hung on a hook near the desk, 7 of them, labeled with cell numbers. Cell 3 would be Nathaniel. They'd put him in the middle cell, away from the street-level windows. Can I ask you something, Toby? She made her voice soft, curious. Yes, miss. The prisoners down there, are they treated well? Well enough. They get food, water. We're not monsters. Of course not. I didn't mean to suggest. She paused. It's just, I was at the sentencing today. That young man, the one who could read, I felt badly for him. Toby shifted uncomfortably. He broke the law, Miss Arnott, but he seemed so human, more human than most of the men in that courtroom. They're all human, miss. That's what makes it complicated. Elalina looked up at him, really looked, saw a man not much older than Nathaniel, saw someone who maybe hadn't yet had all the decency beaten out of him by this world. Do you ever wonder if what we're doing is right? She asked quietly. Every day. The answer came quick, honest, then he seemed to catch himself. But wondering doesn't change anything. The law is the law, unless the law itself is wrong. He looked at her sharply. That's dangerous talk, Miss Harland. He'd recognized her. Elalina Harland. His face went white. You're the judge's daughter. I am. And I'm also someone who thinks you're right, that they're all human, and that maybe humanity should count for more than law. She stood, moved toward him slowly. Not seductive, not threatening, just present. I know you're a good man, Toby. I can see it. You hate what you have to do here. hate keeping people in cages, but you do it because you need the job, because you have family to feed, because refusing means losing everything. How do I know? Because we're the same. You and I both trapped by circumstances, both doing things we hate because the alternative is worse. She paused. But what if there was another alternative? What if you could do the right thing and not lose everything? He stepped back. Miss Harland, I think you should leave. How much do you make, Toby? $20 a month. 18. I'll give you 200 right now, and a letter of reference from my father's law office that says you had to leave this position for family reasons. No shame, no questions asked. Enough money to relocate your family to Tennessee or Kentucky, or anywhere you want to go. His hands were trembling. You're asking me to let you down to those cells. I'm asking you to look the other way while I do what should have been done a long time ago. They'll know it was me. I'm the only guard here tonight. Tell them I threatened you. Tell them I had a gun. She pulled the pistol from her cloak, showed it to him. It's not even a lie. Toby stared at the gun, at her, at the keys on the wall. Ilalina could see him calculating, could see the same war between fear and greed and something deeper, something that might actually be conscience. If I do this, he said slowly, I can't ever come back to Mississippi. No, but you'll be free, really free, not just pretending. He closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them again, something had shifted. 200, right here. She pulled the money from her satchel, set it on the desk between them. He took it, counted it, pocketed it. Then he took the keys off the wall and handed them to her. Cell 3, you've got 10 minutes. After that, I'm raising the alarm whether you're done or not. That's all I need. The stairs down to the cells were narrow and steep. The air got thicker with each step, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and human waste and despair. There were 7 cells. Only 3 were occupied. Cell 1 held the scarred giant, already sleeping or pretending to. Cell 3 held Nathaniel. Cell 5 was empty. Nathaniel looked up when he heard her footsteps. His eyes widened when he saw who it was. Not a question, a statement, like he'd been expecting her. Elena fumbled with the keys, found the right one, opened his cell. He didn't move, just stared at her like she might disappear if he blinked. We don't have much time, she said. Can you ride a horse? Yes, good. There's a mare tied behind the courthouse. Her name is Judith. She'll take you to the river road. Follow it north for 15 miles. There's an abandoned tobacco barn with a broken window. Inside you'll find supplies, food, money, another map. Stay there until tomorrow night, then continue north. She pulled the map from her satchel, showed him the route. These marks are safe houses, people who will help you. This one here is the Jeffries farm. Tell them Ilalina sent you. They'll get you to Memphis. Nathaniel took the map with shaking hands. Why are you doing this? Because someone has to. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you'd rather suffer than give up hope. I know you spoke truth in a courtroom where truth is the most dangerous weapon. I know you're the kind of person worth saving. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he touched her hand, just his fingers against her wrist, the lightest possible contact. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're free. When you're so far north they can't touch you. When you're somewhere you can use that education for something other than forging papers. She pressed the map into his hand. Now go, before I change my mind. Before your courage fails. Before God or the devil or my father catches us. Nathaniel moved toward the stairs, stopped, turned back. Come with me. The words hung in the air between them. An invitation. A possibility. A future Elena had never let herself imagine. I can't, she said. Why not? Because I'm not done here yet. There are others. Others I can save. If I run now, all of this ends. If you stay, your father will destroy you. Probably. But I'll take as many people with me as I can before he does. Nathaniel smiled, sad and beautiful and understanding. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm the most damned. Maybe those are the same thing. He left then, disappeared up the stairs like a ghost, like a dream, like everything Elena had ever wanted and would never have. She waited in his empty cell for a moment, letting herself feel the weight of what she'd just done. Another sign, another escape, another brick removed from her father's temple of law. 40 men freed, 1 more to go, before they caught her. She locked the cell behind her and returned the keys to Toby. He's gone, she said. Toby nodded, didn't look at her. You should go to. I'll wait 15 minutes before I raise the alarm. After that, you're on your own. That's all I've ever been. Elena walked out of the courthouse into the last few hours of darkness before dawn. Somewhere ahead of her, Nathaniel was riding north toward freedom. Somewhere behind her, her father was sleeping, unaware that his daughter had just committed her most deliberate act of treason yet. She had 6 days before Charleston, 6 days before her father either shipped her off or locked her away, 6 days to decide if she was brave enough to run or damned enough to stay. Dawn came to Natchez like a judgment, the sun breaking over the river in shades of red and gold that made the water look like it was on fire. Elena watched it from her bedroom window, still wearing yesterday's clothes, her hair still pinned up under the bonnet she hadn't bothered to remove. She hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the moment Nathaniel had asked her to run with him. kept imagining what she would have said if she'd been brave enough to say yes, but Elena wasn't brave. She was stubborn, angry, righteous in that dangerous way that made people confuse self-destruction with heroism. And she wasn't finished with Mississippi yet. The alarm went up at 7 in the morning. She heard the commotion from her window, men shouting, horses being saddled, dogs barking with the eager violence of animals who loved the hunt. By 8, half the town was gathered in front of the courthouse, while her father stood on the steps, his face carved from stone, issuing orders like a general preparing for war. Elena dressed carefully, put on her best day dress, pinned her hair in elaborate curls, applied just enough rouge to hide the exhaustion. When she descended for breakfast, she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be. Judge William Harlan's beautiful daughter, concerned but composed, innocent of any knowledge about last night's events. Her father was already at the table, though his plate was untouched. He looked up when she entered, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of guilt. She gave him nothing but a polite smile. "Good morning, father. I heard the commotion. Has something happened?" "The prisoner escaped, the one from yesterday's trial. The forger. Oh my, how terrible. Do they know how he got out? The guard claims you visited him last night, claims you threatened him with a pistol and forced him to give you the keys." Elena's heart stuttered, but she kept her expression neutral. "That's absurd. Why would I do such a thing?" "That's what I asked Toby. He said you paid him $200 to look the other way." "Father, I was here all night. You can ask Bess. She brought me tea at 9, and I never left my room after that." It was a lie. They both knew it was a lie. But Elena had prepared for this moment, had woken Bess at 6 in the morning and told her exactly what to say. We had made it clear that if Bess didn't corroborate her story, Elena would tell Judge Harlan about the money Bess had been skimming from the household accounts to send to her sister in Alabama. Leverage, blackmail, sign compounded on sign. Ella was getting good at this. "Bess confirms the story," her father said slowly. "But the guard was very convincing, very detailed in his description of you. Then perhaps he's lying. Perhaps he let the prisoner escape for money and is blaming me to avoid punishment. Perhaps Judge Harlan pushed his plate away. Or perhaps my daughter has become such an accomplished liar that she can look me in the eye and deny the obvious truth." They stared at each other across the table. The moment stretched, taut as a rope about to snap. "I don't know what you want me to say, father. I want you to tell me the truth. For once, in your miserable, rebellious life, I want you to show me the respect of honesty." Elena set down her coffee cup. When she spoke, her voice was perfectly calm. "Here's the truth. I think the law you enforce is evil. I think the sentences you pass are morally indefensible. I think every man you've condemned to death or slavery or a lifetime of suffering deserves better than what you've given them. And if I had the power to undo every verdict you've ever handed down, I would do it without hesitation." Her father's face went white. "You admit it." "I admit nothing except my opinions, which, last I checked, were not illegal, even for women. Your opinions are treasonous, seditious. If you weren't my daughter, if I weren't your daughter, you'd have had me arrested months ago. But I am your daughter, which means we're stuck with each other, bound together by blood and name and all the sins we've committed in the service of preserving this family's reputation." She stood. "I'll go to Charleston, father. I'll smile at your lawyer friends and dance with your business partners and pretend to be the beautiful daughter you wish I was. But don't mistake compliance for capitulation. And don't ever forget that the only reason I'm still here is because I choose to be." She left him sitting at the table alone with his rage and his powerlessness and the dawning realization that his daughter had become something he could no longer control. The next 3 days passed in a state of barely contained chaos. Search parties scoured the countryside. Reward posters went up in every town within 50 miles. Judge Harlan personally led a group of trackers into the swamps, convinced they'd find Nathaniel's body drowned in some forgotten backwater. They found nothing because Nathaniel was smart, because Elena's map was good, because the network of people willing to hide escaped slaves was larger and more organized than anyone wanted to admit. By the 4th day, the search was called off, not because they'd given up hope, but because there were other prisoners to sentence us, other slaves to control, other rebellions to crush. The machinery of oppression couldn't pause just because one educated house slave had slipped through their fingers. Elena spent those days preparing for Charleston, packing trunks, writing letters, playing the role of obedient daughter with enough conviction that even Bess started to believe it. But at night, alone in her room, Elena was planning something else entirely. She'd saved 40 men, 40 souls pulled from the edge of damnation. But there were others, hundreds of others, thousands, a whole population condemned to suffer under laws written by men who'd convinced themselves that cruelty was justice. She couldn't save them all, could barely save herself at this point. But maybe she didn't need to. Maybe what she needed to do was burn the whole system down. The idea came to her on the 5th night while she was sorting through her mother's old papers, letters from relatives, recipes, a journal her mother had kept during the early years of her marriage, and tucked in the back of the journal a list of names. Elena almost missed it. We would have missed it if the handwriting hadn't caught her eye. Her mother's careful script listing 15 names, all men, all residents of Natchez, all prominent citizens. Next to each name was a number ranging from 3 to 20-7. It took Ilelanina several minutes to understand what she was looking at when she did. Her hands started shaking. The numbers were slave counts, how many enslaved people each man owned. Her mother had been keeping records, documenting ownership, creating a census of human property in Adams County. But why? Ileana flipped through the journal, looking for context. Found it 3 pages later in an entry dated April 1833, 2 years before her mother's death. I can no longer participate in this system in good conscience. William says I'm being hysterical. Says that slavery is an unfortunate necessity, that we must think of our position, our future. But I cannot reconcile the teachings of Christ with the sight of human beings in chains. I cannot call myself a Christian and own another person's labor, so I will do what I can. I will document, I will record, and perhaps someday, someone will use this information to set things right. Ilelanina read the passage 3 times. Felt something crack open in her chest, a grief she'd been carrying for 11 years without knowing its true weight. Her mother had known, had understood, had been trapped in the same cage Ileana was trapped in now. Marriage to a man whose values she despised, complicity in a system she couldn't escape, searching for any small way to resist. The list of names wasn't random, it was a target list, a map of who profited most from human suffering, a blueprint for dismantling the machinery piece by piece. Ilelanina copied the list into her own journal, added her own observations, updated the numbers based on what she'd learned over the past year. Then she started planning. On the 6th day, Judge Harland received a letter. It was delivered by a nervous courier who refused to say where it came from, only that he'd been paid handsomely to ensure it reached the judge's hands and no one else's. The letter was written in elegant script on expensive paper. No signature, no return address. Just a message. You sentenced 43 men this year. I freed 40 of them. The remaining 3 died because I couldn't reach them in time. That failure haunts me, but not as much as the knowledge of how many more I couldn't save. How many more you will condemn. How many more will suffer because men like you have decided that profit matters more than humanity. This is your only warning. The daughter you think you control is more dangerous than you imagine, and the revolution you think you've prevented has already begun. It just doesn't look like you expected. Judge Harland read the letter once, twice, then he walked upstairs to Ilelanina's room and threw open the door without knocking. She was packing, folding dresses, organizing shoes, looking for all the world like a woman preparing to leave for Charleston. Did you write this? He thrust the letter at her. Ilelanina took it, read it calmly, handed it back. No, don't lie to me. I didn't write it. She paused. But I could have. The sentiment is accurate enough. Her father's hands were shaking with rage. You have no idea what you've done, the enemies you've made, the danger you've put this family in. I have every idea. I've spent my entire life watching you destroy people in the name of law and order. I know exactly what I've done, and I'd do it again. They'll kill you. When they figure out who's been helping these slaves escape, they won't care that you're a woman. They won't care that you're a judge's daughter. They'll hang you in the town square and call it justice. Then I'll die knowing I did something that mattered, which is more than you can say. He raised his hand, stopped, lowered it. Something in his face shifted from anger to something that might have been grief. When did you stop being my daughter? When I realized what being your daughter meant. He turned and left without another word. Ilelanina returned to her packing. Her hands were steady. Her heart was calm. She'd made her choice. Tomorrow she would get on the coach to Charleston, would let her father think he'd won, would disappear into polite society and advantageous marriages and all the trappings of civilized life. But tonight, there was one more thing to do. That the fire started at midnight. It began in the courthouse basement where the records were kept: property deeds, trial transcripts, bills of sale for human beings bought and sold like livestock, 300 years of documentation proving who owned what, who owed whom, who had the legal right to destroy lives with a signature. Ileana had been careful, used lamp oil instead of kerosene, started the fire in 3 different places to ensure it spread quickly, made sure no one was in the building before she struck the match. She stood across the street and watched it burn. The flames climbed the walls, like living things, hungry and beautiful and utterly without mercy. Windows exploded from the heat. The roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. People ran from their houses, shouting, trying to organize a bucket brigade, but the fire had too much of a head start. By 2 in the morning, the courthouse was nothing but a smoking ruin. By dawn, the fire had spread to the buildings on either side, the land office and the tax collector's residence. By noon, half of Front Street was ash. They never found out who started it. The investigation turned up nothing. No witnesses, no evidence, just a catastrophic accident that destroyed decades of records and left the town's legal apparatus in chaos. Ileana watched from her window as men scrambled to salvage what they could, watched her father stand in the ruins of his courthouse, his face gray with shock, watched the machinery of oppression grind to a halt if only for a moment. It wasn't enough. She knew that the records could be recreated, the courthouse could be rebuilt, the system would continue, because systems always did. But she'd bought time for the men on the run, for the families trying to stay together, for everyone fighting against a world designed to crush them. She'd bought time and hope and the possibility that things could be different, and if she ended up hanging for it, at least it would be for something real. The coach to Charleston left at dawn, pulled by 4 horses and packed with luggage that suggested Ilelanina Harland was leaving Mississippi for good. Her father stood on the steps of their damaged estate. The fire had jumped from Front Street to the residential district, taking 3 houses with it before the rain finally stopped it, and watched her board without saying goodbye. Ileana didn't look back, that didn't allow herself that weakness. Just climbed into the coach beside her traveling companion, a widow named Mrs. Patterson who would serve as her chaperone for the journey, and settled in for the 3-day trip to South Carolina. The coach pulled away. Natchez disappeared behind a curtain of dust and distance, and Ilelanina, for the first time in 24 years, allowed herself to breathe. They made it 20 miles before the ambush started. Happened at a river crossing where the road narrowed and the trees grew thick on both sides. A classic spot for robbery, isolated, difficult to escape, easy to control. 4 men on horseback emerged from the woods, armed faces covered with bandanas. The driver pulled the horses to a stop, his hands already raised in surrender. "Everyone out of the coach," the leader said. His voice was muffled behind the cloth, but Ileana could hear the authority in it. This wasn't his first robbery. Mrs. Patterson whimpered. Ilelanina put a hand on her arm. "Do as he says. Don't resist. Give them what they want, and they'll let us go." They climbed out. The 4 men surrounded them. One kept his rifle trained on the driver. The other 3 approached the women. "Jury," the leader said. "Money. Anything valuable. Hand it over." Mrs. Patterson fumbled with her necklace, her fingers shaking too badly to work the clasp. Ileana helped her, then removed her own earrings and the bracelet her father had given her for her last birthday. The leader took them and studied them in the morning light. Then he looked at Ileana and something in his posture changed. "You're Judge Harlan's daughter, not a question. A statement." Ilelanina's heart dropped into her stomach. "Yes, thought so. Seen you at court. Seen you watching." He pulled down his bandana. I found herself staring at a face she recognized. One of the men from her father's trial 3 months ago, a free black man accused of harboring fugitives. Her father had sentenced him to 6 months hard labor. He should have been in a work camp right now, breaking rocks or digging ditches. But here he was, armed and free, and looking at Ilelanina like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "How did you escape?" she asked. "Same way 40 others did. Someone paid off the guards. Someone arranged safe passage. Someone who looked a lot like you." The other 3 men pulled down their bandanas. Ileana recognized 2 of them brothers she'd seen sentenced to separate plantations. The third was a stranger, but he had the look of someone who'd spent time in chains. "We heard about the fire," the leader said. "Heard the whole courthouse burned down. Records destroyed. Your father's life's work turned to ash." He smiled. "That was you, wasn't it?" Ilelanina said nothing. Incriminating herself too, for armed men seemed unwise. "Even if they were former prisoners, we're not here to rob you," he continued. "We're here to recruit you." "Recruit me for what?" "The real Underground Railroad. Not the polite version your Quaker friends run up north. The version that fights back, that burns plantations, that steals weapons, that makes it too expensive for these bastards to keep human beings in cages." He stepped closer. "You've saved 40 men. That's good. But 40 men isn't enough. There are 4 million enslaved people in this country. 4 million souls who need what you've been doing. But they need it bigger, meaner, more organized." Ilelanina's mind raced. This was insurrection, rebellion, everything the South feared and everything her father had spent his life preventing. "You want me to help you start a war? We want you to help us finish one. This war started the day the first African was dragged onto a slave ship. We're just finally fighting back." Mrs. Patterson made a small sound of distress. The leader glanced at her, then back at Ilelanina. "You don't have to decide now. But know this. You can't go to Charleston and pretend to be a proper lady. They know what you did. Your father's enemies know. The plantation owners know. You burned the courthouse, and that makes you a revolutionary whether you claim the title or not." He pulled out a piece of paper, handed it to Ileana. It was a wanted poster for arson, for aiding fugitive slaves, for sedition. Her name was at the top in bold letters. The reward was $500 dead or alive. "Your father put this out yesterday," the leader said. "Couldn't protect you anymore. Couldn't hide what you were. So he did what men like him always do. He sacrificed you to save himself." Ilelanina stared at the poster, at her own name turned into bounty, at the proof that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. "What's your name?" she asked quietly. "Samuel. Samuel Brooks. I was a freedman." Samuel Brooks. "I was a freedman in Vicksburg before your father decided I was too dangerous to let stay free." He extended his hand. "And now I'm part of something bigger. You can come with us, help us organize, use that clever mind and that insider knowledge to hurt the people who've been hurting us. Or you can get back in that coach and hope you make it to Charleston before someone collects that bounty." Ilelanina looked at his hand, at Mrs. Patterson's terrified face. at the 3 other men watching her with a mixture of hope and suspicion, at the wanted poster with her name on it. She thought about Nathaniel, somewhere up north by now, about the 40 men who'd made it to freedom because she'd been willing to sin, about her mother's journal in her father's courthouse and the mathematics of mercy that had consumed her life, about the choice between safety and salvation. Took Samuel's hand. Tell me everything. The camp was hidden 15 miles into the swamps, accessible only by boat and protected by men who knew how to disappear into the landscape. Elalani counted at least 30 people escaped slaves, free blacks who'd chosen resistance over safety, and a handful of white abolitionists who'd crossed the line from sympathy to action. They'd built something remarkable, a village of sorts, complete with sleeping quarters, a makeshift kitchen, and a weapons cache that would have made her father weep. The organization was militarily in its precision. Scouts, guards, foragers, planners. These weren't desperate fugitives, they were soldiers. Samuel led Elalina to the center of the camp where a woman sat reviewing maps. She was perhaps 50, her hair silver, her hands scarred from what looked like years of field. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp enough to cut. This is Mama Ruth, Samuel said. She runs things here. The same Ruth from the trial. The woman accused of poisoning her mistress. The woman Elanina hadn't been able to save. You escaped. Elanina said, relief flooding through her. No thanks to you. Ruth's voice was acid. You saved 40 men, left me to hang, left plenty of others to die. So forgive me if I'm not impressed by your charity. The words hit like a fist. Elanina had known she couldn't save everyone, had made her peace with that mathematics, but hearing it from someone she'd abandoned made it real in a way philosophy never could. You're right, Elalina said quietly. I should have saved you too. I should have saved all of you. I didn't. And I'll carry that for the rest of my life. Guilt's cheap, Ruth said. Action costs. You're ready to pay. Yes, Ruth studied her for a long moment. Then she stood and gestured to the maps spread across the table. We've been tracking plantation, shipments, cotton, tobacco, all moving down the river to New Orleans for sale. Every shipment represents enslaved labor. Every dollar earned is stolen from people who will never see freedom. She pointed to a route marked in red. This is the Henderson Plantation's cotton run. $40,000 worth of product moving next week. We're going to sink it. Elalina leaned over the map. How fire will torch the barges while they're loading at the dock, destroy the cotton, make it too expensive for Henderson to operate, and while the plantation owners are distracted, we'll evacuate as many enslaved people as we can. That's ambitious. That's necessary. We've been playing defense for too long. Time to take the fight to them. Ruth looked at Elalina with an expression that might have been respect or might have been calculation. Samuel says you burned your father's courthouse, says you destroyed decades of ownership records. That true? Yes. Why? Because every slave sold, every family separated, every human being treated like property. It all started with paperwork, with legal documents that turned people into things. I couldn't destroy the system, but I could destroy its memory, make them start over. Buy time for people to escape while they're rebuilding. Ruth smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. You're more radical than I thought. I'm tired of playing by rules designed to keep me powerless. Good, because what we're about to do will get you killed. We'll get all of us killed, probably. But we'll take enough of them with us that it'll matter. She pulled out another map. This one showed the entire Mississippi River Valley, marked with locations, plantations, docks, safe houses, escape routes. This is the network. Hundreds of people, thousands if we count sympathizers. We've been building it for years. Quiet, careful but quiet. And careful doesn't win wars. It just prolongs them. Ruth looked at Elalina with the intensity of someone making a final judgment. You've been playing at resistance, saving men one at a time. Noble, insufficient. If you want to join us, you need to understand, we're not trying to help people escape slavery. We're trying to end slavery. And that means blood, property destruction, destabilizing the economy, making it too costly for the South to maintain this system. I understand. Do you? Because the woman who walks into this camp isn't the woman who walks out. You can't go back to being Judge Harlan's daughter. Can't go to Charleston and find a husband and pretend this was just a rebellious phase. You choose this. You're choosing exile, danger, probable death. Elalina thought about her bedroom window, her vanity, her mother's jewelry, all the trappings of a life she'd been taught to want. Thought about Nathaniel asking her to run. Thought about 40 men free because she'd been willing to sin. I choose this. Ruth nodded. Then welcome to the revolution, Elalina Harland. Try not to get us all killed. Epilogue. 6 months later the news reached them and a coded message passed from contact to contact along the river. Nathaniel made it to Canada, working with abolitionists in Toronto, sends his thanks. Elalina read the message by firelight, her fingers tracing the words. She allowed herself one moment of pure, uncomplicated joy. Then she folded the paper and added it to the small pile of keepsakes she carried, her mother's journal, the list of names, the first map she'd ever drawn. The camp had moved 3 times since she'd joined. They'd burned 2 more cotton shipments, freed another 67 people, lost 9 of their own. The mathematics of mercy had become the calculus of war. and Elelanina had become good at it. She stood at the edge of the swamp now, watching the moon rise over the dark water. Samuel joined her, silent for a while. "We're thinking about him," he asked eventually. "I'm thinking about all of them," she said. "The ones we saved, the ones we couldn't, the ones still coming. It doesn't end, you know. Not in our lifetime, I know, but you keep fighting anyway." Elelanina looked at him, at the camp behind them, humming with quiet purpose, at the maps in the command tent, covered in marks that represented both destruction and hope. "My father used to say that justice was about order," she said quietly, "about maintaining the way things are. I used to think he was wrong. Now I know he was right. That is what his justice is, and that's exactly why it has to burn." She turned back to the water, to the reflection of the moon broken into 1,000 pieces on the dark surface. Somewhere to the north, Nathaniel was free. Somewhere to the south, her father was still judging, still sentencing, still building his monument of law on a foundation of suffering. And here, in the between places, Elilan Harlan was no longer a daughter, no longer a lady, no longer anything except what she had chosen to become, a spark in the tinderbox, a thief of lives from the jaws of justice, a woman who had learned that sometimes the only way to save something is to set everything else on fire. The night was quiet except for the sounds of the swamp, the frogs, the insects, the slow, deep breathing of the land. And beneath it all, if you listened closely, the distant, gathering roar of a coming storm. The end.